Make it happen. We are a consultancy that works with social enterprises, predominantly working with organisations on income generation and social value. So basically we help them get money in, and then we help them account for their social value so that they can get more money in. We're based in Stockport. We work right through the UK, so we have clients all over the UK. So far we've set up 97 new social enterprises and brought in just over £165 million for them. We're qualified and experienced in social enterprise. I've got a Masters in Social Enterprise Management, year one of my PhD, on hold at the moment because it's hefty. And we are qualified social accountants. Spectrum of social enterprise is huge. I mean, I could go on forever about social enterprise definitions. How we see it as make it happen is that a social enterprise is a business that has a social purpose. So it's really simple. Now, the problem with that is the world out there categorises social enterprises in legal structures. So some funders recognise them if they're a certain legal structure. We're constantly campaigning to say actually it's about the social value that you produce rather than the legal structure. But unfortunately funders do look at legal structures, and also certain organisations that will go, oh, you're not a social enterprise because you're not this. So hopefully I'm going to take you through today the range of legal structures that people define under the term social enterprise. So the first one I'm going to start with here are charitable organisations. There is constantly an argument about whether charities are social enterprises, and I'll explain why as I go through. Some places say yes, some say no. Different types of charities. So what we've got over on the left-hand side is your most basic form of charity. So on the left, that's a group of people. And those group of people form an association. So effectively, say for example, all the people on this row here came together and said, I know, let's set up a charity to promote social enterprise. Yeah? You can do it just by you coming together and setting up rules, which are known as a constitution. Doesn't mean that you're incorporated, it doesn't mean that you're a business, but you can still set up as an association of people. Now, the problem with that is that each person is liable. So, say you've set up as a group, you're delivering workshops on social enterprise and you give somebody wrong advice. Who are they going to sue? Are they going to sue all four of you? Or are they going to sue the person who's chair? So there's all four. Well, generally they pick the chair, to be perfectly honest, but you're all liable, yeah, because you're acting in your own right. So what tends to happen with these is that you may take out a trustee insurance policy. That only protects you for negligent acts. It doesn't protect you financially. And that's quite an issue that people don't tend to understand as trustees. So if anything happens negligently, it covers you, but if there's any financial problems, it doesn't. And I'm dealing with a charity at the moment that's got about £250,000 turnover, and is still this. And it's not easy, because the trustees are jointly liable for about £50,000. Charity law is a really complex law. It's completely bonkers. It's been there since 1830 and not really been changed. The initial law talks about three main things. It talks about education, religion, and for relief of the sick and the poor. It also talks about poor wenches, but we won't go into that right now. And that didn't change till 1996. So people could only register a charity under those three areas. Now we've got about 21, 22, so they've grown them. So you can now register a charity for animal welfare, community development. It's a lot bigger. However, what's not changed is the responsibility of trustees. So when you set up this group of people as an association, the minute you register that with the Charities Commission, you become under charity law. There are 24 responsibilities for a charity trustee. There's lots, and that's where the issues may be. So the 24 are all about how you govern that money. It's enshrined in something called trust law. So i.e. a building or an asset or money is put in trust, and you as the people are the trustees of that. So there's a lot that trustees have to be aware of when they become a trustee of a charity. So how do we change that so it doesn't give risk to the trustees? Well, the first thing you can do is incorporate it. And the Charities Commission have developed something now called a Charitable Incorporated Organisation. It's a mouthful. That doesn't mean it's incorporated with Companies House, which is really confusing when you think of the term incorporation. Usually means you're setting up a business. The Charities Commission have the power to incorporate it. So you can set up this CIO, and the Charities Commission will give you a charity number, and what they do is the charity itself becomes a person, not the trustees. So if anyone's going to sue, they sue the charity and not the trustees. However, the trustees are still liable under those 24 regulations. So I'll talk a bit more about the regulators in a bit. So you can incorporate it, so it is a company, or you can leave it unincorporated. And the two terms that relate to that is a charitable trust or a charitable association. What the Charities Commission have said is by 2020, they want all charities to be incorporated, obviously because of the risk to the trustees. Are there any questions? No? I shall move on. Incorporation, we've just touched on incorporation. What does it mean? It means that the entity has a legal personality, so it becomes a person in its own right. It can enter into contracts, employ staff, lease property, and have its own obligations and liabilities. Okay? By incorporating, there's a limitation of risk, as we were just saying before. It limits the personal liability of the individuals involved. So it's an important consideration if you do want to employ staff or enter into any contracts, also with funding. So it's the company that enters into that agreement, not you personally. It gives a clear structure of governance, people recognise it. And also, it gives public accountability. So there's certain requirements with a company that you have to fulfil. So you have to certainly send your accounts to Companies House if you're a company. And if you're a charitable company or a charitable incorporated organisation, you have to do a special type of accounts called SORP accounts. And that basically means that you have to account for how money's been spent to ensure that it's spent on charitable purposes. So it does give that recognition, and of course charities have public trust, so people recognise charities. So this charitable incorporated organisation, the new structure, it's a new legal form for a charity. It's incorporated, but they don't have to register with Companies House. What used to happen, just out of interest before this came along, is you used to have to set up a charity and a company because they're both different laws. So it became very confusing for charitable companies because they would have two regulators to report to. Now it's all one. So again, it has the trustees of a CIO will have limited liability. It's usually £1. So if anything happens financially, the most they'll have to pay is £1. It was created in response to requests from charities for a new structure which could provide some of the benefits of being a company without some of the burdens. Okay, so that's the CIO. So, why would you want to set up a charity? Bearing in mind you've got all these responsibilities as a trustee and charity law being completely bonkers. There are benefits with a charity. Firstly, you get a reduction in business rates. So if you're going to have a property, the chances are that you'll only have to pay 20% or actually zero. So it depends on your local authority, but the most you'll have to pay is 20% if you're a charity. So that's a lot of money saved if you've got premises. Charities are exempt from corporation tax. They don't pay any corporation tax at all. They get gift aid. So for every pound that's raised by a charity, the government gives them back between 20 and 25p in every pound. So that's quite nice. It's a lot back. You get preferential rates, such as for advertising, computers, that sort of thing, if you have a charity number. In most cases, charities are exempt from VAT. And of course, as we know, they have public trust. People know what charities are. However, there are restrictions. All that nice stuff comes with these restrictions. Charities cannot trade. So this is where, in terms of social enterprise, people have that different view of whether a charity is a social enterprise. Charities can trade in certain ways, but it's not classed as trading as far as the Charities Commission is seen. It's classed as generating a surplus. So they don't... Right, that comes under the trading of used goods. So charity shops can trade because there's no value to the goods they're given. So that, in effect, they're not trading. So if we look at the trade in terms of buying something, putting a profit on it, and then, yeah, so... However, they can do this, small-scale trading. So in a charity shop, you can sell 20% of new goods and not have to pay tax on it. So that's why you see the new stuff in all the charity shops. So, how did it say you can trade? So there's something called primary purpose trading, okay? Now, what that means is, if you're trading to meet the purpose of your charity, that's okay. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say your purpose was to support people with learning disabilities to gain meaningful employment. You might set up a cafe as part of the charity, and your service users or your beneficiaries will work in the cafe. The point is you're not setting up a cafe to make profit. You're setting up a cafe to meet your charitable objectives. Yeah? So that's the difference.
And to sell goods made by disabled people. That's
the second one.
That's in the second.
Second and the third.
Okay.
So trade carried on by the charity's beneficiaries. Okay. So again, that's the cafe as a result of charitable activity. And ancillary trading would be goods that are made by your beneficiaries. So there's quite a lot of charities that make wood products. That's fine. If they're going to make a chair, or you can sell those because it's part of that charitable objective. Okay? The other thing that charities don't talk about is profit. It's a bad word. They talk about surplus because they're not allowed to make profit. In a charity, you're only allowed to have 3 months' worth of unrestricted funds in your account at any one time, which is not great. They want charities to get rid of the money because you're not there to make profit. Okay? So the sale of donated goods is the one you're asking about with charity shops. Small-scale trading. Charities are actually allowed to have 10% of their turnover as free trading, which is where the bit in the charity shops with the 20% comes from. Income from property is okay, raffles and lottery and fundraising events. So there's this big way up in, is it worth having all those benefits which were on the other page for the restriction in trading? Because you can never make lots of profit in a charity. Yeah? It's a good thing. If you set up a charity and you are a trustee, you cannot be paid. So it's a bit of a problem. How a charity structure works is, and this is set in charity law, is that you have at least 3 trustees and then you have members. The members vote every year who they want to have as their leaders. So that's the chair, secretary and treasurer. Sometimes it's every 3 years. It depends what they've set in their constitution document. So you're never in control. So if you were to set up a charity, you cannot be paid. And even if you can be a trustee, nobody can stop you being a trustee, but you might not have management of the organisation. So again, it's not a brilliant way, because if you wanted to be paid, for example, as the chief executive, you can't be on the board. So it is a difficult one. Okay, companies. So these are your bog standard companies, private companies. Established to make profit for the benefit of its stakeholders. So again, like the charities, we see the individual acting as themselves on the left-hand side. That's known as a sole trader. So when you decide to set up a business, you might set it up as a sole trader. The only thing you have to do is register with HMRC and do your accounts. However, like the association, you're personally liable as being self-employed. So you're entering into contracts with people, yeah? So what people tend to do is set up a company by incorporation with Companies House. Setting up a private company is really easy. You can actually go on the internet, and there's an organisation called DuPont, who we used, and you can have it set up in an hour and your certificate with you within about 2 hours. That's how quick it is. It costs about £80.
What's the name of the website?
DuPont. D-U-P-O-N-T.
What did you say about DuPont?
No, they'll set up a company for you very quickly.
Is that what I would need then?
No, this is for a private company. So, it depends whether you chose a private company. A private company, the whole purpose of it is to make the shareholders money. So when you set up a private company, you set who are the shareholders at the beginning, and they hold a number of shares. Okay? The reason for that is that at the end of the year, it depends on how many shares you have in terms of the percentage of the profits that you get as an individual. So you operate throughout the year, say you turn over 100 grand, costs you 60 grand to run the organisation, you have 40 grand profit, that's distributed between the shareholders. Okay? So quite very, very simple. There's also the partnership as well. So limited by guarantee is where you have no shareholders. Firstly, I must go through that first. So limited by guarantee has no shareholders. The directors are protected by £1. So if the organisation was to get into any trouble, the most the directors have to pay is £1. Wonderful structure set up by Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s to encourage people not to be sole traders and to set up companies. If a company was a person, it would be a psychopath. Because it has literally no, you can set one up, dissolve it and set another one up. Companies House is not a regulator, it's a filing system. So when you register a company with Companies House, they say, thank you very much for filing. Come back to us in a year's time and pay us £15 just to check your details are still okay. So they don't have any regulations at all. So private limited companies are run by directors. Directors have 3 responsibilities. 1, to pay their taxes, 2, to comply with UK law, and 3, to send in their return to Companies House at the end of the year. And that's it. So compared to the charity with 24 responsibilities, a private company seems pretty good. However, you will never ever get funding if you have a private company, unless it's funding specifically for a private company. Because obviously, if a funder's going to give a private company funding, then there's no restrictions on the directors going, thank you very much, and putting it in their pocket. Yeah? There's also a partnership. A partnership is where 2, 3, 4, 5 people come in, like the association, and they form a legal partnership between them. So you can actually incorporate that, which is called a limited liability partnership, by putting the company in the middle. Social enterprise structures, I like to call them profit for purpose. Everyone calls them not for profit. But that's not true. If they were not for profit, then they wouldn't exist, because they'd have no profit to exist off. So,
But not for profit, I always associate more with charity.
yes, but there is and I'll explain, there is a company, the original social enterprise format is a not-for-profit limited company. Back to the group of people as an association of people. Each person is individually liable. They decide to incorporate. So they can incorporate as a not-for-profit company. All that is exactly the same as your private companies on the page before, with a clause in it saying it's not-for-profit. Still has no regulator. Okay? It was the only way to establish social enterprises before CICs came along, which I'm going to talk to you about. So a lot of the older social enterprises are not-for-profit companies. Okay? That enables them, so it's a limited by guarantee, no shareholders, all the profit goes back into what their objectives are. Yeah? You can also have a limited by shares. So you can also have shareholders on a not-for-profit. And that does happen, that you have shareholders. But again, it does affect funding if you have shareholders. Because again, how can the funders guarantee that you're not going to distribute the funding between the directors? So, Companies House came up with community interest companies. They wanted an easier way for a social enterprise structure that wasn't a charity. Okay? So, all these profit for purpose enterprises, and what we like to call them, and it's the basis of a community interest company, is that they're established to make profit. They're a profitable enterprise, but they put their profit back into social purpose, hence the profit for purpose enterprises. So a private company will put the profit into its shareholders, into their pockets, whereas a profit for purpose puts it back into the community. So a community interest company, you do exactly the same as you would with a company. It is a company, yeah? It's a limited company, although you can have a limited by shares. Out of the 97 CICs I've set up, I've only ever set up one with shares because of how they want to generate income, okay? And I would say, you know, I mean, the whole purpose of what they wanted to do with the CIC is a community interest company is really good for investment because of how it's set up. They like to see at least 51% of profits put back into the community. So, a community interest company, it doesn't have charitable objectives and cannot register a charity. It's not charitable. It's for the benefit of the community. All profits must be invested for the benefit of the community. They've actually changed that because they're trying to make the community interest company more attractive for social investment. So what they say is at least 51% has to go back into the community. Now, how do they define community? It's very, very broad. Yeah, that can be anything from employing someone to reinvesting it in a new development, to actually physically giving it to a community. So it's very, very broad. Okay? The thing about a community interest company is that it's a lovely structure that can be moulded a lot of different ways, and that was the point of it. So it doesn't receive the benefits that charities can. It's treated as a normal company, so you pay corporation tax at the end of the year, you pay VAT, and you know, if you pay people, again, you have to pay the employer's NI and tax. It's exactly the same as running a company. Yeah. However, if you reinvest your profits in that financial year, you have no profits to pay corporation tax on. So that's an interesting one. The difference between the CIC and a private company. Number one, when you register it has CIC on the end of it, so people recognise that it's a community interest company. Number two, when we get to it, it has an asset lock. So what it has that private companies don't have is this clause within it that basically says any assets that the community interest company holds remains for the community. That's why funders like it. It has the second highest level of regulation. When you register a CIC, in effect what you're doing is setting up a normal company, and then it's registered with the CIC regulators who are based at Companies House. Yeah? So when we talked about the not-for-profit companies, what it is a not-for-profit, which is what you said, Glenda, a not-for-profit company registered with the CIC regulators, so it has regulation, whereas a not-for-profit company doesn't have any regulators, yeah? That's the other reason why funders like it. Yeah? The only powers that the CIC regulators have, not like the Charities Commission, is that they can freeze bank accounts and they can remove directors and intervene. That's only if they feel that the CIC isn't operating for community benefit. Now, I've never seen it happen yet with any CICs. Literally, it would have to be that it's putting out that it's a CIC, but then the profits are going in the director's pockets. Actually, I have seen one. Social enterprise body in Manchester. That's just happened. They've just been shut down because the directors were taking the profits out instead of putting it back in. So that's the only way that they would close it down.
49%.
Yes, but they were taking 100%. Yeah. It is actually, I mean, coming across, and I've come across all sorts, and you have to sniff them out. A CIC, because it's so flexible, is an easy way for people to do that. You know, you do get people saying, I'll set up a CIC, you know, because it's going to look good, I can get funding, and then finding ways. So if you're a director of a CIC, you can get paid. Not like a charity. You can run the organisation and be paid as a director. Yes. And remember, that comes out before the profit. So.
Maybe you said before about, let's say there's this 51% profit. What is the time limit to put it back in the community?
Do you know, I'd like to say to you that there are strict regulations on it, but there aren't. At the end of the year, you have to fill in a form, which is CIC regulators insist that you fill in. And that form has 4 questions. First question is, who have you worked with in the community this year? Second question is, have you transferred any of the assets for private concern? Third question is, have you paid your directors what is reasonable?
What does CIC do?
You do know when you run a company what is reasonable as a director. What they're saying is, if you're going to turn over 100 grand and you pay your directors 80 grand, that's not reasonable. Yeah? Tax is separate from legal structures. There's HMRC exemption. Okay, that's probably the best way you can describe it. If HMRC believes that your activities are charitable, regardless of your legal structure, you can become exempt for paying tax. So I've got CICs that deliver health services. They have exemption because health is seen as a charitable purpose. So, yeah, gift aid's an interesting one. If you have donations. However, they do say at the moment that you need a charitable number. So that's where the sticking block is. But I think that'll change. So just to finish off with the CICs. Okay, it costs £35 to register. You get your certificate in about 4 days. It's really quick. So you get a certificate of incorporation and your CIC is registered.
How many subscribers or directors?
You need a minimum of 1.
Only 1?
Yes. However, if you want funding, they insist on 3. But legally, to set up a CIC, you only need 1 director, same as a company. And you can add the others, yeah.
I'm just going to add in there, until you get to the bank account stage, when almost certainly you'll need 2 as well.
Not in, we've managed to get them through with just 1 with a CIC, because the banks class it as a normal business. So that's the other thing to be wary of as well. Banks and CICs, as Glenda would have found out, banks see CICs as normal businesses. So you're going to have to pay business charges. But usually you get the first year free and then, yeah. But yes, you can set it up a CIC with 1 director and the bank account with 1 director, unless it is a charitable bank account, and obviously then they want to see 2 or 3. Yeah? But if you're looking for funding, you need 3, because a funder will ask for 3 directors. Okay?
So do you say if you have another person, you wouldn't get the bank charges, or would you still get those 2?
No, you still get bank charges with the some banks, although I've very rarely seen it. The cooperative is the only one that does a CIC account with no charges. It is a nightmare. I was just going to come to that. Yeah. See, to set up a co-op bank account, I do have a CIC. I've got 3 companies. So I've got 2 private companies and a CIC. My CIC took 4 months to get a bank account through the co-op. It's horrific. They want to know the ins and outs of everything. However, if you want to persevere, then it means you don't get bank charges. And if you're a co-op bank, you can apply for their funds too. So there are benefits with a co-op. Yeah, it just takes longer. Whereas you could probably walk into Barclays or NatWest and get a bank account opened on the same day. Another good bank to think of while we're on the subject of banks is Triodos. Has anybody heard of Triodos? Yeah, Triodos. They're an ethical bank, they're really good. So Triodos is another good option for you. Problem, exactly the same as the co-op. Triodos don't have any branches, so you have to do your banking through the post office. So, as a company, a CIC, limited liability to £1. Again, so if you're the director, you set up a CIC, you have a CIC limited by guarantee, it protects the directors for £1. So if anything happens, the most you'd have to pay is £1. Okay? When we put that into context of social enterprise loans, it's really good. So a social enterprise loan is underwritten by the government, so you don't have to have a personal guarantee. It's a low rate because CICs have a cap on how much interest they can give back, which is 4.75% above base rate. So any social enterprise loans are really low on interest rates. They even give you payment holidays and say, okay, well, don't pay us back until you start to make profit. When you put that in with a CIC and £1 liability, it's quite a good offer. Yeah? So that's a CIC for you. There's over 8,000 CICs registered now. Something interesting to add on to the future of CICs. Has anybody heard of public service mutuals, spin-outs? No? Okay. You know all the local authorities are reducing, they're cutting everything. There is a department in the Cabinet Office called the Mutual Support Service. I'm telling you this because we're a provider, so we do work with spin-outs. What happens is, say for example, which one are we doing at the moment? Yeah, Oldham Integrated Youth Services. They're spinning out of the council, which means that the staff will set up a social enterprise independent of the council, and the council will provide them with a contract to deliver. Okay? They guarantee them a contract and they get funding from the Cabinet Office to support that transition process. So they contract us in to go and help them do that. Every single spin out, and we're up to 56 now, is a CIC. So that gives you an idea of how the legitimacy of CICs are growing. So the chances are, if you're looking at contracts or commissioning with a public service body, they're going to be a CIC. So they're going to recognise you. Okay? Cooperatives. Here's the fun one. Cooperatives, growing hugely. Cooperatives. What they are basically are members who have one share, one vote. Okay, so you have different types of cooperatives. So I'll start with the workers' cooperative at the bottom because that's a bit more easier to explain. Okay, so what's happening in the growth of workers' cooperatives are employee-owned businesses. So we have a lot of GP cooperatives, we have a lot of food cooperatives now. So let's give an example of that. Say in an area they decide to hold a farmer's market. Each person, each trader can form the cooperative. And they will have one share and one vote of what happens in that market. So the profit that they make from that market will be distributed to each member. Yeah? No. The thing about a cooperative is that it's about a democratic and equal share. I'll go through the principles in a second, which makes it different from having shares on a normal company. What will surprise you is that all housing associations are cooperatives. And they're a form of a cooperative called the Industrial and Provident Society. You might recognise that from from building societies. The reason why they are is because the way they're set up by the Housing Corporation, what they insist that they have, is that each tenant has a vote. So what it's classed as is that the houses, all the housing association does is hold the houses in trust for those tenants. And then the tenants basically have a share and have a vote. And then we have a co-op for the benefit of the community. Exactly the same structure, but the profits go back into the community. Yeah? The profits don't go to the members. So I suppose you could say this is the profit one, this is the charitable one. A charitable co-op for the benefit of the community can register with the Charities Commission, so they can be a charity. Quite complex cooperatives.
So cooperative can be a charity?
Yes. Now, if you want to set up a co-op, you have to go through Cooperatives UK, who will charge you £900 to set up a co-op. Okay? However, once you have a co-op, there's lots of benefits you can get from Cooperatives UK. They're a whole sort of beast in their own. What is interesting about co-ops is they're bigger outside the UK than they are in the UK, which is a real shame because obviously, and I have to say, Rochdale Pioneers, which is near where I'm from, originally started up the cooperatives. And due to systems in the UK, they haven't flourished as much as they should do. They are bigger outside Spain, for example, huge cooperatives, a lot of agricultural cooperatives. So in Sweden, childcare cooperatives are really big. Yeah, so if you can imagine, all the parents get together, have a cooperative. It's brilliant. Really good. Yeah. It's a really interesting field, you know, I'm lucky that I've studied cooperatives and democratic associations, and I've seen them in operation. There's one in up in Sheffield, I think it is, or in Hull or somewhere like that, called Suma Whole Foods. Have you heard of it? Amazing. It is actually, it's a workers' cooperative. So they make whole foods. Now, every single member of staff is paid the same, whether you are a finance manager, HR manager, or whether you're a packer. And one day you could be packing and the next day you could be working in HR. So they swap roles. But every time they make a decision, every single worker has to come down to the floor and make that decision. If you can imagine the thing of a charity and it having members and all of that, multiply that with a co-op. Because everybody, this one share, one vote. And that goes into the principles. So if you want to set up a co-op under Co-ops UK, an official co-op, you have to sign up to these principles. So the first is that it's voluntary and open membership. You can't restrict who you have join your co-op. Now, can you imagine if you have a workers' co-op and somebody comes along and says, I want to work for you and join your co-op? You can't restrict it. Right? A lot of co-ops, actually, the way they combat that is ask for an investment. So there's one called Gripple, which again is up north. It's mad on co-ops up north. And you have to pay £35,000 to work there. So that's how they restrict it, okay? So voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, all members have to make decisions. Member economic participation, that's the bit about can we have money off you at the beginning. Autonomy and independence, completely independent. They have to sign up to educate, train and give information on how to run a co-op to all their members. Cooperation among cooperatives. Preferably they have to do business with other cooperatives. And concern for the community. So they all have an element where they have to have concern for the community. So they're interesting organisations is the best I can say. You know, and sometimes they're brilliant for what they do in some cases. But I certainly see the larger ones having difficulties with all sorts of that democratic control. Okay, so just to summarise that, in terms of your regulators, we'll start right at the bottom. As we said, those associations of people could be known as a community group or a society. They're unregulated because they're not incorporated. So it's just a group of people that get together. Now, one interesting thing I always said about this is they do have something called trust law that kicks in. However, if I was to give you £10 and I was to say, I want that spent on providing somebody a workshop, yeah? And you went to McDonald's and used the £10 to buy a McDonald's, I would have to take you to court to sue you for it. So it's not great. Around 60% of charities in the UK are this form. So all those little ones, yeah? So it's interesting. Limited companies, not a regulator. Incorporation means you register at Companies House. Not a regulator, just a filing system. Industrial and provident societies, cooperatives, are actually regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Again, another anomaly. Where does that come from? That's because cooperatives were originally building societies. Yeah? Very, very strange. They're going through a big review of this at the moment with cooperatives. Do you know, it's really, co-ops are amazing when you look at them around the world. There's a really good book if you wanted to read about that, and it's called The Emergence of Social Enterprise. It's by Borgaza and DeForney. Have you got it on a... Have you got any? Yeah. So Borgaza, Borgaza, and DeForney, Defourney. It's an amazing book. It takes you around the world looking at social enterprise, a lot of them cooperative, and you just see sort of the freedom that they have outside of UK systems. The social enterprise sector in the UK is different than anywhere, and it's mainly because of our welfare state that everything's very different. So you wouldn't, you know, it's an anomaly to other countries coming in and looking at our social enterprise sector. Yeah, if you went over to America, social enterprise is completely different over there. A lot more to do with philanthropy over in America. So it's interesting how it changes around the world.
Greater emphasis on social innovation in the round rather than social enterprise.
They tend to, in America, they tend to say more around social entrepreneurship than social enterprises, because it's a way of doing things. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so then the CIC regulators regulate community interest companies, and the Charities Commission right at the top there, highest regulation in the UK. Believe it or not, they have the most powers. Charities Commission can put trustees in prison. Okay, I'm very, very quickly just going to show you a new concept that I'm very proud to have developed with, as part of my PhD, with a fellow, Rory Ridley Duff, his name, Dr. Rory Ridley Duff, who runs Cooperative and Social Enterprise up there. We came together to develop a new legal model called the Fair Shares model. And what this does is very similar to a co-op, but it allows you to allocate different types of shares to different types of people. So you can allocate shares to founders. So they have a type of share that has specific permissions with it. The same for labour shares for people who work there. The same for service users, people who use it, and the same for investors. What it means is that they don't cross over. They all have the same. So you don't get, founders are protected because they still have an interest. But then people who work obviously want a dividend back. So it's about playing around with those shares. Okay, so what effects do legal structures have? So this is a bit I was saying to you, just to summarise everything. The choice in which legal structure you would choose depends on these four things. First thing is income generation. I would say, how do you want to generate income? If you want to be reliant totally on funding, then a charity is your best bet, because funders recognise charities, but you get all of that stuff with it. Yeah? If you want to trade, don't choose a charity, because it's not going to allow you to trade freely to make profit. So there's different considerations depending on where you want your income to come from. Tax considerations, obviously. CIC, you're going to get taxed. But is it worth it if you can generate profit, as much profit as you want? They're the way up, you know. Charity, you're not going to get taxed, but then you haven't got brilliant powers to be able to generate income. I get quite excited about mixing different legal structures. So if you have a CIC where you donate the profits to a charity, absolutely fantastic. You don't pay tax in your CIC because you donated your profits, and the charity benefits from it. So there's some brilliant ways to use different legal structures together. Okay, governance and democracy. If you want to have a board and members to have democracy, then a charity is your route. If you want just a very lean organisation with directors, then a CIC is the route. You know, so... And public trust. The problem we have with CICs and social enterprise, the public doesn't know us yet. They recognise the charity. So sometimes, now people have said to me, can you fundraise as a CIC? Yes, you can. when people give money, they give it to what you do. They don't sit there and say, oh, well, what legal structure are you? We work a lot with development trusts. So a development trust will establish at the top. So that might be all of you that establish a development trust. And you might set that up as a charity. Yeah? When you see an opportunity for a social enterprise, you might say, oh, right, well, we're going to invest in that and set that up as a CIC. So, and then you might see the next thing and say, well, actually, the best legal structure is a cooperative for this. So you set up a cooperative. So there's an example of a really good one, and you might want to go and have a look at them on the internet, which is the Sunlight Development Trust. So they started off as a community association, a building, and they wanted to be able to generate their own income to run the building. So the first thing they did was set up a cafe in the centre. So the profit from the cafe then went back up to the development trust, and they said, oh, what can we use this for? So they set up a web design business, because somebody from the community that was on the board of the development trust said, well, actually, I've got this skill, can I do this? After that, they set up a catering company that now does all the catering for 10 Downing Street. They have cafes in all the super health centres, so they're doing really well. And the profit from that now funds all of their community activity. So they're non-reliant on funding at all.
Are they all separate though?
Yeah. You use the legal structure which is best for that. So yeah, so have a look at them, they're really good. But that's what we're seeing more of now, that flexible way, the profit for purpose companies, where you can make profit in a CIC and then donate the profit to charitable activity to the charity. Basically because you would want a different name and different branding if you're going to run a profitable company than you would for a charity. Yeah. And legally they don't cross over. So you can take a risk with the CIC and it not affect the charity. So, but that's a good one for you to look at. I'm just going to say this is the final slide. We're doing well on time. Just to summarise those considerations. So if you want to trade, remember charities have restrictions. You can't trade openly. With the CIC, if you wanted to set up a TV shop and use the profit to put back into community benefit, that's up to you. Yeah? You couldn't do that with a charity. So charities have restrictions and can't officially trade and make profit. Charities cannot hold large amounts of unrestricted funds, which is a huge problem if you want to develop your organisation, because there's not enough there. Commissioning, so contracting with public services. Unincorporated associations don't have any legal entity, so you're unlikely to get a contract. Yeah? Charities have complicated governance. This, you know, it shouldn't be said, but they're quite resistant to contracting charities in because they're not quick to make decisions. It has to go back to the board. Member-led organisations can take a long time to make decisions because every member has to be consulted. In terms of funding, the public know and trust charities, and many trust-giving bodies will only fund charities. That's the other problem. However, there's just as many funders in terms of social enterprise, and that's the next session I'll be doing, isn't it? Income generation.
Yes, there's more. I'm going to wrap it up now.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that's me.